Good morning and welcome to the Fundamentals of English Language and Literature Teaching, Paper 10 for Semester 3, MA English Part 2. In this video, we are going to talk about the operant conditioning of the theory behaviorism. We started the discussion of the theories of language learning and we said that behaviorism is an important theory of language learning that has influenced the English language teaching, along with cognitivism, innate language hypothesis, interlanguage hypothesis, error analysis, and contrast analysis hypothesis. Behaviorism is the result of the empirical experiments that is made on organisms and other laboratory animals. The effect of heat, light, temperature, food, etc. on animals like amoeba, dog, pigeon have been recorded and has been represented as stimulus giving rise to response. The stimulus that is externally given to the animal and as a result the response that is exhibited by the animal to the stimulus given. The higher the animal is, the more the pattern of behavior is, and behaviorism completely believed that learning is a change in behavior. It believes in stimulus and response and conditioning and thereby bringing about a change in behavior. Essentially, there are two types of conditioning. One is classical conditioning, which is based upon the experimentation that is done on dogs by Pavlov in Russia. The second is the operant conditioning, which is based upon B.F. Skinner, the American psychologist, and his experiments that are done on pigeons. In classical conditioning, it believes in the pre-existing stimulus, as we saw in the yesterday's video. With the experimentation done on dog, with a pre-existing stimulus of salivation, which would become automatically response to the meat that is given to it, which becomes the stimulus. This stimulus of giving meat and the response of salivation of the dog is correlated with the ringing of the bell, which becomes the second stimulus. And every time it is repeated, after a few repetitions, the dog automatically will be conditioned because the moment the bell is rung, the dog salivates, which would mean that the animal has learned something new and has been classically conditioned. In operant conditioning, there is no pre-existing stimulus, as we could see. The experiments were done by B.F. Skinner on pigeons, and a pigeon is shut in a cage to which it is attached a mechanical lever which ejects a pellet of grain whenever it is pressed. The bird struggles hard for grains and by chance presses the lever and is rewarded by the grain. When it gets a pellet of grain, whenever it presses the lever, the bird automatically associates the pressing of the lever and the reward of the grain in its mind. And then onwards, the bird presses the lever and fulfills its hunger by getting the grain. Thus, the bird has known to condition by handling the lever for producing the desired result. Such a type of conditioning where there is no pre-existing stimulus-response bond and a new response is been observed for the stimulus is what is called as operant conditioning. So, as we could see in the point number 1 of the slide, the hunger of the pigeon and the action is to press the lever and the reward is the grain would be given to it. In the initial stages, the pigeons never knew about this action and knew about the reward thereby. But in due course of time, by chance, with a number of attempts of trial and error, automatically for the stimulus of hunger, the action has been done by the pigeon, the action of pressing the lever and automatically gets rewarded. In point number 1, the pigeon never knew anything. In point number 2, it has been conditioned operantly with no pre-existing stimulus. So the operant conditioning, it operates on the environment to bring about the desired result. There is no pre-existing bond of stimulus and response. The internal stimulus or the hunger, the action of pressing the lever and the reward are connected. By chance, the bird realizes the relation between the lever and the grain, and the repetition of the action and the reward sequences form a bond of association between the action and the reward. A bond is formed between the stimulus, the hunger, and the action of pressing of the lever, which in due course of time becomes conditioned response. The bond is reinforced by reward and weakened by its absence of it. The organism plays an active role in operant conditioning because it operates on the environment to get about the result. The operant conditioning emphasizes the effect of result of conditioning, while classical conditioning ignores this aspect of learning process completely. The implications of these two types of conditioning of behaviorism are that the American psychologist Thorndike has applied these two types of conditioning, both classical conditioning and operant conditioning, and put forward the following three laws of learning. The first law is called as the law of effect. The law of effect states that when a connection between a stimulus and response is made, and this is followed by a satisfactory state of affairs, the connection is strengthened. If the connection is followed by any annoying state of affairs, the connection automatically is weakened. The second law says the law of exercise. The law of exercise states that the connections are strengthened by use and weakened by disuse. The third law is called as the law of readiness. The law of readiness states that when an organism is prepared to act, it derives satisfaction by acting and is annoyed if it is not allowed to act. And to do this, motivation is what is very important. So, the effect of behaviorism on language learning is that learning is a stimulus response theory which is satisfied with the connections are strengthened and weakened without use, and motivation in this process plays a very important role in learning. The behaviorist view of language learning is that every learning by an individual is conditioning. Operant conditioning is the best, but sometimes the classical learning also takes place. Language is learned through the use and practice, and language is learned in situations. So, response to the stimulus requires efforts, and producing correct responses need attention. Spoken is always first, followed by writing, and the receptive experience is followed by the expressive experience. Responses are rewarded and so are confirmed, and learners are faster if the teacher is only with the correct responses. Every new item learnt is to be reinforced and rewarded for efficient learning. The problem with this behavioristic model of learning is that learning processes are not the same for human beings and animals. It does not distinguish between human and non-human learning. Some psychologists opine that learning cannot be equated with behavioral change and outward or observable. Many of the learning outcomes are internal, which cannot be observed. All learning cannot be equated with external behavior. It is important to include internal states of learning as well, which is as active as the external behavior, and this cannot be accounted with behaviorism. The idea that almost all knowledge and behavior is based on learning is proved indefensible. It cannot give satisfactory explanation for language acquisition and the rate at which the individuals learn the language. All learning according to behaviorism is by the agencies external to the individual. It does not consider the independent role that the learner employs in the learning process. And so everything is externally controlled. It attempts to explain learning processes with one single set of conditioning principles. Repetitions could lead to mechanical knowledge of grammar, but not to the use in different situations. Errors cannot promote learning at all according to behaviorism. Only the correct set structures are introduced and repeated for learning. Somebody has to correct and compels learning and not the individual. The learner is very passive and the external agency helps the learning to learn. This theory is inadequate in explaining the enormous capacity of young children in learning languages. And it also cannot explain the capacity of children to pick up many more languages much faster than they are introduced to the learners. Chomsky was the first to express this sort of criticism. With a finite number of linguistic rules, children can produce an almost infinite number of correct linguistic utterances. Children are able to produce sentences that they have never heard before quite early in their language development. But still, behaviorism, in spite of the fact that it has many of the lacunas, is an important school of psychology that influenced the descriptive schools in linguists and the structural approach to language teaching. Even though learning is not just parroting or controlled by the external agency 100%, still, behaviorism has its place in the theories of language learning, followed by the next theory, cognitivism. Thank you for watching this video on behaviorism. Stay tuned for the next videos. Bye for now.